Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Us Michigan fans had that conversation a couple of weeks ago regarding what positions we would like to see Michigan maybe go after in this spring transfer portal window. And, we all came to the same conclusion, right? One, the wide receiver position needed to be a priority for this Michigan program. They went out and made it happen last week, right? Bringing in guys like Amarian Walker, who, the upside on him is extremely high. And then bringing in a veteran wide receiver from Youngstown State in Charleston. The second position that a lot of Michigan fans, including myself, kind of wanted to see Michigan potentially address was in the back end of the defense. And I think our conversation really kind of came to, we like the names that we have in this secondary, obviously led by guys like Will Johnson and Makari Page. That being said, we had some question marks about the depth of that position, right? You lose some guys to the NFL draft. You lose Keon Sabb to Alabama in the portal. Then Rod Moore goes down with the injury. We were looking at this Michigan secondary going into 2024, and at first saying that is going to be a strength of this Michigan defense. And although I still think it's probably going to be a strength of this Michigan defense in 2024, you probably would like to see a little bit more bodies in that room, particularly guys with experience. And it seems like that is exactly what Michigan is doing. Want to have kind of a two-pronged conversation. One, talk about what Michigan has in the secondary going into 2024, and then talk about four names that have emerged in the portal, two names that we haven't talked about yet, two that we have, and kind of address what guys we think would fit this Michigan secondary best. Fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, the Michigan fans. Y'all know I'm a massive Michigan fan. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas, it truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, would love to get some feedback on the conversation we are about to have, because I certainly see a lot of Michigan fans saying, hey, I feel good about what we have in the secondary. We feel good about some of the young names. If that's how you guys feel, would love to hear it in the comments section. We'll chop it up. I always learn a ton from you guys. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with what Michigan has as it sits heading into 2024. And I think the beauty of where Michigan is at is if we don't add anybody in the portal in the back end, I think a lot of Michigan fans, are still feeling pretty good, right? When you have a lockdown cornerback, in my mind, the best cornerback in the country, maybe a little bit biased, but I truly think he is. Will Johnson at one spot. You have guys like Jair Hill on the other. You feel pretty good about what the cornerback room is looking like. You look at the safety position. Makari Page, I think one of the more underrated safeties that we saw in college football last year. Quentin Johnston getting that eligibility left. You have a guy like Zeke Berry, who I think is, kind of that chess piece for Michigan in the back end, can do a lot of different things. You have a guy like Jaden McBurrows potentially playing that nickel role. You feel pretty good. And I think if you're Michigan, you're looking at both the safety and cornerback room and saying, it might make sense if Michigan just adds a little bit more depth heading into fall camp in the 2024 season. And the reason that I kind of argue that is you look back at Michigan in 2023, and I don't think this conversation gets had enough because a lot of people focus on the NFL talent that we had in 2023. We certainly had that in 2023, but I think what made this defense so special is the amount of depth that Michigan had, not only in the front seven, but in the back end as well. You think about all the names that were playing specifically in that back end, right? Guys like Mikey Sandstrell, Rod Moore, Makari Page, Keon Sabb, Quentin Johnston. There were so many guys that were getting rotated in for different situations and scenarios. I think one of the things that made this Michigan team so special in 2024 that not enough people really recognize is how deep this team is. And you look at the secondary and you say, yeah, we do like the names that we just listed, but you could kind of see why Michigan might want to add some more bodies and some more depth, and particularly some more starting experience to that back end. And that seems to be the priority for Michigan. If there was a last position that Michigan seems to want to address, Lamar Morgan, Sherrone Moore, it does sound like it's in the back end. Want to talk about two players that we haven't talked about yet. Update on the two players that we have talked about. But the first one I want to talk about is Cameron Broussard coming from Sacramento State. Now, I'll be the first one to admit, hand up, I don't watch much Sacramento State football in the falls. But Cameron Broussard, going back, watched the game against Stanford, was looking at some numbers, really, really impressive safety. And I think more importantly, he's a guy that has something that he's elite at, and that is playing in the box, being a force in the run game. you're looking at a guy that's listed at 6'3". Now, that's what he was coming out of high school, has played over 1,500 snaps during his career at Sacramento State, 329 snaps last year alone as a box safety. He sits at 6'3", 200 pounds, 14 run stops, a missed tackle rate of 4%. That is about as low as it gets from safeties at the college football level. And the reason why I'm so intrigued by Cameron Broussard is he's a guy that can get it done in coverage. 4 interceptions the last 2 years, 14 pass breakups, phenomenal numbers. He's got a lot of length, getting his hands in a lot of different throwing windows. But more importantly, he offers you that coverage ability while also really giving you a lot in run support. And you look at why a guy like Mikey Sandstrom as kind of that nickel role was so valuable for Michigan last year. I think a large part of it was, yes, he gave you that coverage ability, but he was also a guy that when he was playing in the box, he was very good against the run as well. Did not miss a lot of tackles. You can say the exact same thing for both Makari Page and Rod Moore. I look at Cameron Broussard, especially as you enter in guys or teams like Washington and Oregon and USC into the Big Ten. It is going to be vital to get athletes that can be good in coverage on the field, but not giving up a lot against the run. A guy like Cameron Broussard, with how good he is in the box, stopping the run, but also giving you that coverage ability. I'm a massive fan of taking a flyer on Cameron Broussard. Michigan has shown the willingness to go to the FCS level and grab guys that they think can make that transition to the Big Ten. Cameron Broussard played a great game against Stanford. That was the only sample size we had of Power 5 competition. Cameron Broussard, I believe, had 6 tackles, 3 run stops in that game. I'm a big fan of Cameron Broussard. I think he's long. I think he can get his hands in a lot of throwing windows, but also provide a lot of value as a box safety. I'd be very interested if Cameron Broussard comes to Ann Arbor. We'll break down the film if he does. Now, the next player I want to talk about, another new name, is Wesley Walker, who played the last couple of seasons at Tennessee, transferred to Louisville during the offseason. He's back in the portal after the spring. You look at Wesley Walker, and the first thing is experience. And I think that is something that Michigan is clearly prioritizing in the secondary. We have some guys that I think we feel really good about, right? Guys like Zeke Berry or Jair Hill. They haven't played a ton of football. They're not necessarily known commodities. I think Michigan might be looking to just add some known commodities, some veterans, some guys that have been around the block a time or two. Wesley Walker at the Power 5 level has played over 2,200 snaps during his college football career. He's going into his 6th year, over 184 tackles, 11 tackles for a loss, 12 passes defended, started 10 games for Tennessee, all the games that he was healthy for. And I think what really makes you feel good about Wesley Walker is Brian Jean-Marie has a lot of experience with Wesley Walker. And I don't think Michigan would be going after a guy like Wesley Walker if Brian Jean-Marie doesn't say, hey, I think he can add something to this Michigan program. Now, do I think Wesley Walker comes in and is an immediate starter for Michigan? Probably not, because I think at the safety position, I'm taking guys like Makari Page, potentially a guy like Zeke Berry and Quentin Johnston over Wesley Walker. That being said, you talk about bringing in Wesley Walker, a guy that has started multiple seasons at the SEC level as a depth piece. You think about how important Quentin Johnston, a depth piece last year for Michigan, was. I think this one would make a lot of sense. He's probably my least favorite out of the 4 names that we're going to talk about, but I mean, I think we certainly would try to add a guy like Wesley Walker. The last 2 names, guys that we have talked about, and my favorite name, Terrence Brooks. I think the ceiling is so high for Terrence Brooks. Now, kind of an update on how that recruitment is going. It sounds like UTSA is the front runner, right? That one seems like if Michigan wants Terrence Brooks bad enough, Michigan should be able to go out and make that happen. Now, some other programs that are kicking the tires on Terrence Brooks, you have the Oregon Ducks, who have kind of shown that they're hammers in the transfer portal. The USC Trojans, where I sit with that one is, you look at that Oregon team, they got 6, 7, 8 cornerbacks that are starting caliber guys. That is one of the more talented rooms you see in the country. Does Oregon really need Terrence Brooks? And does Terrence Brooks really want to go to a crowded room with the Oregon Ducks? And then you look at USC, and if you're kind of picking between Michigan, USC from a developmental standpoint, I get USC fans. They made some really good moves in terms of their coaching staff. I think Michigan, if they want Terrence Brooks bad enough, I think Michigan should make that happen. And I am a massive fan of Terrence Brooks. I think the ceiling is extremely high. He's played a lot of football at the Power 5 level. We'll see if Michigan can get that one done. The last one I want to talk about, a guy that we did talk about is Jared Mangum from Michigan State, a guy that he's a turnover machine. He's got a lot of range in the back end. Again, ton of experience at Michigan State, was previously getting recruited by Michigan as a wide receiver. This is another guy that whether he starts or not is probably a question, but he's definitely going to be a rotational piece and that in that safety room for Michigan. And I think it all comes down to, again, we feel good about the young talent that we have in that safety room and really in the secondary room in general. I do think Michigan realizes that you probably want to be a little bit more deeper because you have one or two injuries. You got to rotate some more guys, and you're probably getting a little bit more hairy than you would like. Again, Michigan last year had such a privilege where, I mean, guys like Quentin Johnston were coming off the bench. Keon Sapp, who's going to start for Alabama in 2024. Keon Sapp was a great football player, didn't start for Michigan last year. Played a lot, but didn't necessarily start. Michigan had an embarrassment of riches in terms of depth in that secondary, and I think Sherrone Moore wants that to continue heading into 2024. I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan lands two of the names that we talked about. My favorite two, probably Cameron Broussard coming from Sacramento State, and then Terrence Brooks at that cornerback spot. Of course, we'll keep you guys as updated as possible. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.